Hot Ones is an enormous success. They've been entertaining us weekly since 2015 when Sean Evans was in middle school, I believe. Billions of views, blindingly famous guests, they've been credited with boosting hot sauce sales in multiple continents. And I'm a fan. But there's always been something that made me go, See, their lineup of sauces is supposed to get increasingly hotter. They have these cool graphics to prove it. But what always makes our beloved celebrities break down isn't sauce number 10 or 9, it's number 8, a habanero sauce called Da Bomb Beyond Insanity.
I feel like I'm gonna die. I know.
I'm not the only one who's wondering about this.
Why does it seem like Da Bomb is hotter than all the other sauces?
Maybe it just has the worst flavor, some ingredient that makes it more irritating to the mouth or throat. Is Da Bomb simply disgusting? I tried to get a hold of Hot Ones to ask them, but they didn't respond to my email, nor did the folks at Heatness, which is the sauce supplier for the show. So we had to do some digging.
Did they tell you how they came up with those numbers?
They did not, and I never asked.
They don't get that numbers from the makers because I don't test.
I honestly don't know the answer. You'd have to ask those guys.
It doesn't make any sense.
You can fool the average person, but you are not fooling me.
It's not supposed to be this hot.
If you're new here, this is a channel where we look into where facts come from. And today we have a special Howtown investigation of Hot Ones and the science of spicy. Okay, so the first thing that I did was I made a chart, when in doubt, make a chart.
Right. There's the sauce ranking on the x-axis, basically the order that Hot Ones puts them in. And then it's showing how spicy on the y-axis.
Right. Then when you add in sauce 9 and sauce 10, you can see the scale of this. We're talking about...
It shoots up incredibly high.
So they're saying that number 10 is 20 times hotter than number 8, which is Da Bomb.
Right.
And I wanted to find out if that was true, but first you've got some deep context for us on what spiciness even is.
So to do this kind of investigation, you need an objective unit, and there is one that exists, the Scoville heat unit, which is essentially a way of measuring the concentration of the spicy chemicals found in hot peppers. Capsaicin is the main one, but there are a few different varieties. These molecules act on these receptors that are found all over our bodies. When they get over 43 degrees Celsius, they let in a bunch of calcium ions, which starts the signal cascade that tells the brain it's uncomfortably hot. But weirdly, if capsaicin binds to this channel, it sends the exact same signal. It's tricking our brains into thinking there's painful heat where there is none. It's pretty weird that peppers put this irritant in their fruit. After all, fruit is supposed to be tempting. It's basically a bribe. I'll give you this little package of sugar and vitamins if you help disperse my seeds. Why would peppers make their fruit unpleasant to eat? This was the question that I sort of got sidetracked by while you were working on this Hot Ones investigation. So if you'll indulge me, I want to go down this rabbit hole. There are a couple studies that try to answer the question, why are peppers spicy in the first place? The first study came out in 2001, and it focused on some wild chili peppers found in southern Arizona on the slopes of this mountain. These peppers are actually the same species as jalapenos and bell peppers. They're an example of what peppers were like before domestication. Tiny little spicy berries. The peppers share the mountainside with a bunch of fruit eaters, the cactus mouse, the pack rat, and the curve-billed thrasher, which would also make good names for a metal band. So the researchers trapped a bunch of these guys, brought them back to the lab, and offered them up some different fruits. There were the wild spicy peppers, another wild pepper variety that was not spicy, but that had a nearly identical nutritional profile, and hackberries, this very common, also not spicy fruit. So what happened? They all ate the hackberries and at least some of the non-spicy peppers. But the rodents wouldn't even touch the spicy peppers, while the birds gobbled them up. It turns out in birds, their version of this receptor has a single small change that means capsaicin doesn't affect them. So now we have a new question. Why would deterring mammals, but not birds, give peppers a competitive advantage? The researchers planted some fresh seeds from the non-spicy peppers, and also some seeds that had taken a detour through the gastrointestinal systems of these animals. And the seeds eaten by the rodents didn't sprout. And there were other benefits to getting eaten by birds. They tended to poop out the seeds in the shade of hackberry bushes, where peppers were more likely to flourish, and then be discovered by other birds, continuing the cycle.
Okay, so in this story, capsaicin maybe arises by random mutation, and then it's successful because it deterred the critters that somehow destroy the seeds while they're eating them, I imagine.
Exactly.
But it doesn't make it any less attractive to birds, which spread the seeds beautifully.
Right. That's one explanation that's sort of supported by this particular study. But there's another story. The same researchers went out a few years later and came up with another possible explanation. This time they took their investigation to southern Bolivia, where there's a wild pepper that comes in spicy and non-spicy varieties. It's like an on-off switch. There's no in-between. And the scientists would go out and survey patches of peppers through the very scientific process of just popping them into their mouths. By picking peppers, they could pinpoint the precise percentage of each patch that was pungent. And some patches were more pungent than others. The question was, why? If they could identify the environmental factors responsible for these differences, they might learn more about why peppers evolved capsaicin in the first place. Now, in this part of Bolivia, there were areas that were wet and lush, and there were areas that were this dry scrubland. Where would you guess there were more spicy peppers? It turned out that in the wettest sites they surveyed, all the peppers were hot. In the driest, only a few were hot. So they looked a little closer. One thing they noticed is that some of the peppers looked like this. They had this gross fungal infection. And the more infected the peppers were, the fewer seeds sprouted. It turned out mild peppers were more infected than spicy peppers. They took this fungus back to the lab and cultured it on plates with and without capsaicin, and the capsaicin really slowed down its growth. The final piece of the puzzle were these little bugs that spread the fungus as they snacked on the peppers. And in sites with more bug activity, they saw more spicy peppers.
So in this story, the spicy peppers do better in wetter areas being the spots where fungus thrives, where there's maybe more insects. And in the drier areas, it's less necessary to have that kind of defense. So we've got capsaicin controlling fungus. So two different, very plausible stories. Which one is the real one?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, they're both real, and they're also both not the full story. Something that evolutionary biologists really struggle with is to not attach themselves too strongly to any one explanation.
It seems like it's also a bias in journalism or just in storytelling more broadly. We like for effects to have one cause. You know, we like to tell a simple story.
Yeah.
But there's really no reason scientifically why something couldn't be driven by multiple things, and probably that's much more often the case.
Yeah, if you look at the great diversity of life on Earth, it didn't arrive at its current state through some simple straight line. There's been millions of years for a very convoluted path to all of these creatures that we know and love today. And I think that's something to be celebrated and embraced, even if it's harder to talk about in a narrative way. That montage that you just saw, I got all those clips from today's sponsor, Storyblocks.
Storyblocks, of course, is the stock media library where you sign up. You pay one price, you get unlimited downloads, footage, music, sound effects, After Effects templates, all that good stuff.
And you can get started with your own unlimited media downloads by going to, what's the URL?
That would be
storyblocks.com/howtown. Or click the link in the description.
Okay, back to our investigation. Remember, we wanted to find out where these numbers come from. And our search routed us through a peculiar subculture of mammals who are not at all deterred by capsaicin. In fact, they're obsessed with it.
I like hot peppers.
What does it mean to be a chili head?
I grow them in my front.
Everyone is obsessive about their love for chilies.
I have the original Primatali.
Trinidad Maruga Scorpion.
This is Borgnine mustard.
7-pot Primo.
The Sugar Rush Stripey Pepper. This right here is the chemical formula for capsaicin. And it's cool because it looks like Johnny. Doesn't it almost spell Johnnny?
Jon Scoville is a YouTuber who reviews chilies and sauces on his channel.
That smells so good. To me, if you're passionate, I don't care if it's a bell pepper, but if you're passionate about that bell pepper, you're a chili head to me.
These pepper influencers get their peppers from growers who invent new varieties by cross-pollinating plants. And the most famous pepper breeder is Smokin' Ed Curry, owner of the Pucker Butt Pepper Company in Fort Mill, South Carolina.
I'm Smoking Ed Curry.
The madman. The Michael Jordan of hot chilies.
Eating fresh peppers is not for the faint-hearted, but for me, it's just like candy.
Smokin' Ed doesn't hang out on the Chili Head forum, so he kind of took everybody by surprise when he announced his Carolina Reaper. It was recognized by the Guinness World Records, and that made it the king of the super hots, which are these peppers that are selectively bred for extreme levels of capsaicin. That gets competitive. The era of the super hots began a couple of decades ago, and ever since then, there have been accusations of seed stealing, pepper doping, competing claims for hottest pepper. But then, in 2017, Smokin' Ed announced a pepper that's so hot, it kind of shut up the old arguments and started all new ones. It's called Pepper X. It's this yellowish-green pod that Ed says is twice as hot as the Carolina Reaper, but he wouldn't let the other chili heads try it. And he told the Associated Press that no seeds would be released because everyone else had made money off the Reaper. Instead, the only way to actually try Pepper X was by buying a Hot Ones official sauce called The Last Dab.
He's the creator of Pepper X, the creator of The Last Dab.
Since then, Smokin' Ed has partnered with Hot Ones to make 3 other Last Dab sauces with Pepper X. They've all been featured in the number 10 spot on the lineup for the show. But the secrecy around the pepper has really fueled some skepticism among the chili heads.
It's the Bigfoot of peppers.
Seeds are not released, pods and powders not released.
Behind closed doors, multiple vaults around that pepper.
And this is what Smokin' Ed said about the first Pepper X sauce when it first came out.
The Scoville heat units for the sauce is just over 2.4 million on our first test, but the pepper's coming in at 3.18 million.
So we're playing with fire over here.
We're playing with fire.
Okay, so way up there.
And then last year, the Guinness World Records announced that Pepper X was officially the hottest pepper at 2.69 million Scoville.
Okay, 2.69 million. Well, maybe we should explain now exactly what a Scoville heat unit is.
Yeah, let's get into the
scale. The scale is.
Where did this come from?
Great. Right. Wilbur Scoville was this renowned pharmacist he won all kinds of pharmacy awards. He edited a pharmacy magazine called The Spatula, and he was eventually hired by the Pfizer of his time, Park Davis and Company, who had this fancy lab in Detroit. They were working on a topical ointment for aches and pains. And like many ointments of that time, it used capsicum, pepper extract, as an active ingredient. And there's actually some science behind this. When your body encounters capsaicin, it tends to turn down the sensitivity of that pain pathway, sometimes by just pulling those receptors off your cell membranes. And so over time, you develop tolerance to spicy food. And these ointments were taking advantage of that feedback loop. But the problem that these ointment makers had is that different batches and different varieties of peppers have different levels of spiciness, and they needed a standardized method to measure pepper heat. In 1912, Wilbur came up with the Scoville organoleptic method. They dry a pepper, grind it up, dissolve it in alcohol, and then they dilute a tiny drop of that solution with a bunch of sugar water. Then they'd get a panel of tasters to try the mixture, and they'd keep diluting it until those tasters couldn't detect the heat. The amount the sample is diluted is the Scoville heat rating. Up at the high end of the scale, you've got pure capsaicin, which needs to be diluted 16 million times before you can taste it. At the low end, we got bell peppers. You don't even need to dilute their samples. Then you've got jalapenos, habaneros, ghost peppers. Now we're getting into the realm of pepper spray. And according to Smokin' Ed, Pepper X lands right here.
The Scoville scale with tasters, it seems pretty subjective.
Right. And so obviously this isn't how they do things anymore.
Which is, a very common story in the history of science. You have technologies improving the precision of the methods. And before we get into how that works, can I send you some of my microscope videos?
Oh yeah, look at that.
It's a little bit gory looking.
Yeah, there's something kind of fleshy about it.
It's upsetting.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to look inside it is because I had heard from the chili heads that you can actually see the capsaicin at this level of heat.
This is like not the juice of a jalapeno that when you cut in, it's like actually looks, oily.
That's capsaicin. It's hydrophobic, which is why water notoriously does not help when you eat something that's too spicy, and that's why you really need fat. And that waxy texture is also the key to understanding how they can measure spiciness objectively in a chemistry lab. It's a method called high-performance liquid chromatography. The pepper extract sample goes into a column that's packed with hydrophobic particles that attract capsaicin. The different capsaicinoids are attracted to this column to different degrees, so as the sample moves through, it separates. And then as it leaves the column, it passes through a detector that uses a specific wavelength of light that's absorbed by capsaicinoids. And that detector puts out a chromatogram with these spikes representing the concentrations of each capsaicinoid, which they can then convert to Scoville heat units. Now, Smoke and Ed works with a chemistry professor at a school nearby called Winthrop University. For more than 15 years, they've had students testing pucker butt peppers as part of their studies. And they put out this report as evidence for Pepper X's Guinness World Record. And it follows the standard methods, except instead of testing a sample that's made up of a bunch of peppers, they tested individual pepper pods. So some of the chili heads would like to see Pepper X tested again in an industry lab.
I would love to see independent testing.
Let people peer review.
Third party, verified and tested.
If your pepper is that hot, and that's what the world wants to know, just go third-party test it, man. How hard is that?
They were doing these tests on peppers, samples of peppers, but I assume you could just throw some sauce in there and get some results as well, right?
Yes, you can test hot sauces with HPLC, but I don't think that that's what Hot Ones was doing to get their numbers. And the reason is this. So a key thing to know about the pepper Scoville ratings that you see online is that they come from tests on dried samples of peppers, which means that they're highly concentrated, in a form that no one really consumes. If you are testing a fresh pepper, you're talking about something that's maybe 80% water.
Right, it's diluted.
Mm-hmm. And then when you go into a sauce, it's even more diluted, which is how we know that the rating that Hot Ones has for the last dab has to be wrong.
Because the last dab has the same exact Scoville rating as just Pepper X. They basically took Pepper X's Scoville rating and slapped it on this bottle.
That seems to be what they did. And the YouTuber that I talked to thinks that this kind of exaggeration is actually risky.
Here's why it's a scary thing. If somebody tries that, you know what they're going to go? They go, I can eat 2.4 million Scoville heat units. And somebody's going to have something called a tincture, which is a drop of stuff, and that comes in really, really hot. They're going to have a horrible experience if that's the case. So people, it sets people up. To me, it's dangerous. You got to be careful.
Now, all along, I'd been texting Smoke and Ed, trying to set up an interview, and eventually, he was kind enough to sit down and answer my questions. Hot sauce brands don't seem to use the Scoville scale in their own marketing so much, but it does show up on the show. And so I'm curious, do you have to provide those numbers to Hot Ones, or are they doing their own testing or estimations?
Those numbers are based on the peppers that are going into the sauces, okay? No one uses Scoville on their bottles because everyone who makes bottle knows about the dilution factors that go in there. Mm-hmm. So does it make something more intriguing to say 2.2 million or 2.7 million, or does it make it intriguing to say 184,000? Okay. Yeah. The general public doesn't understand science, so they put things out in general terms, okay?
Sure. So there you have it. It's not about the science, it's about selling hot sauce, which, fair enough, right? But Scoville units are a real thing that can be measured in a lab for about $60 a sauce. So we shipped the latest Hot Ones lineup off for testing and confirmed that they are indeed in the wrong order. Now, ideally, you would want to test each sauce more than once, but we don't have that kind of money. So with that caveat, here are the lab-tested Scoville levels for the current Hot Ones lineup. With one exception, all of the sauces are less pungent than they're portrayed, and Da Bomb has more than twice the capsaicin by volume than the last dab. Oh my god. Oh god. It's getting worse. I do not recommend that. It says right here, natural pepper flavoring, which is another way of saying pepper extract. It's what these stunt sauces use to get extreme levels of heat. And Hot Ones and the Heatonist, they want to promote natural sauces. And so in their 10-pack, they actually replaced Da Bomb Beyond Insanity with a natural version that isn't as hot and probably tastes a lot better. So to their credit, they could be putting a bunch of extract sauces in the lineup to try to hit those high numbers, and they don't. At least not anymore. In the first couple of years of the show, they had a sauce in the lineup called Mad Dog 357. According to our tests, it's even hotter than Da Bomb Beyond Insanity, which means that the real champions of Hot Ones are those early guests who endured a sauce more than 3 times hotter than the last dab. And nobody knew it until now. We were able to pay for these tests thanks to our Patreon members and support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation in association with IMI. The Sloan Foundation is enhancing public understanding of science and technology in the modern world. We tested 17 different sauces, so the full results are over on our Patreon, as well as a longer version of this show that we presented live at IMI Fest with a special guest, Bobby Duke.
This is 8 and this is 10, and we're gonna have you try them both.
I'm gonna join you. You're gonna join me? Oh boy.